Alright, greetings and salutations. My name is Comic Fire, and welcome to episode 3 of our dramatic read of the Edge Chronicles, Stormchaser. Today we'll be picking up at Chapter 5. Chapter 5, The Blood Oak Tavern. Creak, creak, creak. The tavern sign protested as it swung to and fro in the gathering wind. Twig glanced up and flinched. The sign was, as might have been expected, an artist's impression of a blood oak, a terrible flesh-eating tree. And a very good impression it was, too, Twig admitted with a shudder. The glistening bark, the glinting mandibles. Every time he saw the picture of the tree, he could almost smell the rank metallic stench of death oozing from it. For Twig knew all about blood oaks. Once, lost in the deep woods, he'd fallen victim to a particularly gruesome specimen. It had swallowed him whole and would have eaten him alive had it not been for his hamelhorn skin waistcoat, which had bristled at the danger and jammed in the monster's throat. Trembling at the memory, he asked himself why anyone would want to name a tavern after so disgusting a creation. "Are you going to stand there gawping all night?" Cloud Wolf snapped impatiently as he pushed past his son. "Let's go in." As he threw the door open, boof! A burst of energy exploded from the room. Heat, noise, light, and a heavy cocktail of smells, both fragrant and foul. Twig reeled backwards from the blast. No matter how many times he visited the Blood Oak Tavern, he would never get used to the shock of that first moment. The tavern was like a miniature version of Undertown itself, reflecting the incredible diversity of the place. There were flathead and hammerhead goblins, oak elves, mob gnomes, black dwarfs and red dwarfs, trolls and trogs of every shape and size. There were leaguesmen and sky pirates, tinkers and totters, raggers and roiners, merchants and mongers. It seemed to Twig, as he stared in through the open door, that there was not a single edge creature, tribe, or profession not represented in the throbbing room. The Clottertrog on the door recognized Cloud Wolf at once. He informed them that Mother Horsefeather was somewhere hereabouts and waved them through. Sticking close to him as Cloud Wolf carved a route through the room, Twig tried hard not to knock anyone's drinks as he went. Flatheads were notoriously volatile, and throats had been slit for far less than a tankard of spilled wood ale before now. Jostled and crushed in the sweaty, steaming surge of bodies, it occurred to Twig that the Blood Oak was exactly the right name for the tavern after all. The owner of the tavern was over by the rear exit. She looked up as Cloud Wolf approached. "Mother Horsefeather," he said. "I trust I find you well." "Well enough," came the guarded reply. She turned and stared down at Twig questioningly. "Ah, yes," said Cloud Wolf. "This is Twig. Twig, Mother Horsefeather. I want him to sit in on our meeting." Twig trembled under the ferocious gaze of the creature in front of him. Of course, he'd seen Mother Horsefeather before, but always at a distance. Up close, she was imposing, intimidating. As tall as Cloud Wolf himself, she had beady yellow eyes, a sharp hooked beak, and a ruff of crimson feathers around her neck. Her arms, too, were fringed with feathers which, since she was standing with her taloned hands clasped together, hugged her like a purple and orange shawl. Twig found himself wondering whether, under the voluminous yellow dress, her whole body was covered with the same magnificent plumage. All at once he became aware of someone snickering to his right. He turned, and there, perched on a bar stool, was a slight, almost luminous creature, grinning from ear to huge bat-like ear. Mother Horsefeather raised a feathery eyebrow and glared at Twig menacingly. "This is Forficule," she said, and returned her unblinking gaze to Cloud Wolf. "He, too, will be present during our little talk," she told him. Cloud Wolf shrugged. "It's all the same to me," he said, then added as if Forficule were not there. "What is it? Looks like the runt of an oak elf litter." Mother Horsefeather's beak clacked with sudden amusement. "He's my little treasure-wedger," she whispered. "Aren't you, Forfy?" "Right then," she announced to the rest. "Follow me. We'll find it much easier to talk in the quiet of the back room." And with that, she turned on her talon toes and disappeared through the door. Cloud Wolf and Twig followed her, with Forficule bringing up the rear. The room was hot, airless, clammy. It smelt of decay. And as Twig took his place at the small square table, he felt increasingly uneasy. To his left was his father, to his right Mother Horsefeather, while opposite him sat Forfecule, eyes shut, ears trembling. The fur of his hamelhorn skin waistcoat prickled beneath Twig's fingers. Mother Horsefeather placed her scaly hands in front of her, one on top of the other, and smiled at Cloud Wolf. "Well, well," she said pleasantly, "here we are again." "Indeed," said Cloud Wolf. "And may I say how hale and hearty you are looking tonight, Mother Horsefeather, and how much yellow suits you." "Oh, Wolfie," she said, preening despite herself, "you old flatterer." "But I mean every word," Cloud Wolf insisted. "You two are as dashing as ever," Mother Horsefeather clucked admiringly. Twig looked at his father. It was true. In his ornate sky pirate regalia, with its ruff and tassels and gleaming golden buttons, Cloud Wolf looked magnificent. Then, with a sudden shiver, Twig recalled how angry his father's face had turned when he'd let go of the helm, when the Stormchaser had gone into a downward spin. How he had cursed when their precious cargo of ironwood had tumbled down out of the sky. He looked up. Forfecule was staring at him intently. "Be careful what you say, or even think." That was what his father had told him. Twig stared back at the quivering-eared Nightwave and shivered with anxiety. "The rudder wheel, eh?" he heard Mother Horsefeather saying. The pleasantries were clearly over. "It sounds important." "It is," Cloud Wolf agreed. "And therefore costly?" Cloud Wolf nodded. "Well, I'm sure we can come to some agreement," she said brightly, "so long as the quality of the ironwood lives up to my expectations." Twig felt the blood drain from his face as the enormity of what he'd done suddenly struck home. Because of him, the Stormchaser would never fly again. His heart pounded loudly, and when Forfecule leaned across and whispered to Mother Horsefeather behind his hand, it pounded louder still. The bird woman's eyes gleamed. "So, Wolfie," she said, "will it live up to my expectations, do you think?" She leaned forward and thrust her beak into his face. "Or is there something you'd like to tell me?" she demanded, her voice suddenly clipped and hard. "Tell you, he began, scratching behind his eye patch. "That is—" He glanced around at his son. Twig had never seen him look so weary, so old before. "Well?" Mother Horsefeather demanded. "We did have a rather unfortunate setback," Cloud Wolf agreed, "but nothing that can't be put right on our next voyage." "You seem to forget," she interrupted brusquely, "that you owe me 10,000 already. And that's before interest. Plus, of course, the cost of a new rudder wheel." She paused dramatically and began preening her neck feathers carelessly. "I'm not sure there should be a next voyage." Twig shriveled up inside. "Unless," she went on slyly, "it's on my terms." Cloud Wolf did not flinch. "And those terms would be?" he said calmly. Mother Horsefeather pulled herself to her scaly feet and turned around. She clasped her hands behind her. Cloud Wolf and Twig stared back at her expectantly. A half-smile played over Forfecule's lips. "We go back a long way, Cloud Wolf, you and I," she said. "Despite your current unfortunate financial problems, you are still the finest sky pirate captain there is. After all, it's hardly your fault that the Stormchaser became riddled with wood bugs." She stepped forwards. "Therefore, it is to you that I come with what will surely prove to be your greatest challenge. If you are successful, your debts will be cancelled at a stroke." Cloud Wolf eyed her mistrustfully. "And what's in it for you?" "Oh, Wolfie, Wolfie," she said and cackled with laughter. "You know me so well." Her beady eyes glinted. "A great deal, that's all I'm prepared to say for now." "But save your questions until I have explained," Mother Horsefeather interrupted sharply. She breathed in. "I have been approached," she said, "by the... Forfecule coughed loudly. "By a sanctifrax academic," Mother Horsefeather continued. "He wishes to get his hands on some stormfrax. Lots of it, and he will pay handsomely for the privilege." Cloudwolf snorted. If he needs Stormfrax, then why doesn't he simply raid the treasury, he said. From what I've heard, everyone does these days. Mother Horsefeather stared at him impassively. It's to replenish the depleted stocks in the treasury that the Stormfrax is needed, she said. Too much has been taken for Frax dust already, she continued, glancing down at the silver medallion around her own neck. Not that anyone has actually been successful, but if nothing is done, then the floating rock will break its moorings and Sanctifrax will drift off into open sky forever. Cloudwolf spat. Sanctifrax! What good has that place ever done me? Mother Horsefeather clucked with irritation. Sanctifrax is an integral part of all of our lives, she snapped. Its scholars are the weather diviners, the map makers, the sifters of mist and phantasms that come in from beyond the edge. It is they who read the patterns which bring order from chaos. Without them, Mothertown itself could not exist. You of all people, Wolfie, should understand this. I know only that Sanctifrax stole the years of my prime and then cast me out, Cloudwolf said. Mother Horsefeather's eyes sparkled. You felt cheated. You still do, she said. And rightfully so, she paused. That is why I offer you now the possibility to avenge yourself on the usurpers. Cloudwolf stared back at her as it finally occurred to him what the devious bird woman was after. You mean you want me to sail to the Twilight Woods in search of fresh Stormfrax, he said. I mean, said Mother Horsefeather, that I am giving you a second chance. You will be able to utilize all that training you were given in the Knights Academy. You will show that Cloudwolf is more than a mere cutthroat and outlaw. At long last, she said as she puffed out her breast feathers, the magnificent Stormchaser will be used for the purpose it was originally built. Not lugging ironwood around like some sort of glorified tug ship, but storm-chasing. Twig's heart thrilled at the sound of the word. Storm-chasing, he whispered, savoring every syllable. He smiled excitedly. Storm-chasing. The next moment, any dreams he might have had were shattered. Out of the question, Cloudwolf snapped. Oh, but Wolfie, Mother Horsefeather wheedled. Think of the acclaim that will be heaped upon your head when you arrive back triumphant, with enough Stormfrax to weigh down the floating rock of Sanctifrax for 1,000 years. Think of the glory. Think of the power, she added softly. Twig wheeled his father to agree. Cloudwolf shook his head. For of course, with the treasury weighted down once again, Mother Horsefeather went on, the accursed link between the Rain-Tasters and Leaguesmen will at last be broken. Her eyes glinted. New alliances will have to be forged, a new hierarchy established. Think how high in the pecking order you could find yourself. You and me, Wolfie, just you and me, up there at the top. But still Cloudwolf remained unmoved. Many long years have gone by since I left the academy, he said, and the Stormchaser is not the skyship she once was. Wolfie, Wolfie, Mother Horsefeather chided him. Such false modesty. Quintinius Virginix was the most outstanding knight the Academy had ever seen, and the skills you learned there have been honed to razor sharpness as Cloudwolf, the finest sky pirate captain ever. Twig heard his father snort. And as for the Stormchaser, she went on, we will have it repaired, realigned, and refurbished. The works. She will fly as she has never flown before. For a moment, Twig thought this would sway it. Surely his father would be unable to resist such an offer. Cloudwolf smiled and played with his waxed side whiskers. No, he said. He scraped the chair noisily backwards and stood up from the table. And if now you'll excuse me. Mother Horsefeather began scratching at the floor in a sudden fury. Excuse you, she screeched. No, I will not excuse you. Her voice grew more and more shrill. You have no choice. I have something you need, and you have something I need. You will do what I say. Cloudwolf merely chuckled to himself as he made for the door. In an uncontrollable rage, Mother Horsefeather flapped and thrashed about. The table tipped over. The chairs went flying. Twig, dodging back out of her way, caught sight of Forficule. He was staring intently at the door, ears quivering and a smile twitching at the corners of his mouth. "You're finished!" Mother Horsefeather was screaming. "Finished! Do you understand? I'll see you never so much as set foot on a sky ship again! Ah!" There was a muffled knock. Mother Horsefeather froze. The door opened. "You!" she exclaimed. "My lord!" Cloud Wolf gasped and fell to his knees. Twig stared at the newcomer in confusion. He was old, very old, with long white hair and a short staff to aid his unsteady gait. With his broken sandals, his fingerless gloves, and his patched and threadbare gown, he looked as wretched as any alley vagrant. Yet there was his father, kneeling down before him. Twig turned to Forficule for an explanation, but the night waif had moved away. It was up on the table, urgently whispering into Mother Horsefeather's ear behind its pale and bony hand. Twig would have given anything to know what was being said, but strain as he might, he could hear nothing but a conspiratorial hiss-pss-pss. Twig groaned, returned his attention to his father, and groaned again. If he'd been disappointed by Cloud Wolf's reaction to Mother Horsefeather's proposal, then he was mortified to find his father still kneeling. "Will you stand up and fight?" he wondered bitterly. "Or do you intend to remain on your knees forever?" Chapter 6. Screed Toe Taker. The journey across the mire was proving to be as harsh as anything Mim had ever experienced. And if the leader of the Knock Goblin family was finding the going tough, then the others were all but at the end of their strength. Mim's concern was growing more acute with every passing minute. Screed had given strict instructions that they should all keep together, yet the further they went across the endless muddy wasteland, the more separated they were becoming. Mim squelched back and forth along the long, straggling line as fast as the gluey mud would allow. From the young'uns up at the front to old Torp, who was bringing up the rear and back again, she went, offering words of encouragement as she passed. "Not far now," she assured them. "Nearly there." The rank, stagnant stench of the mire grew stronger. "Forget where we are now and keep your thoughts on the wonderful place for which we're bound. A place of plenty, a place of opportunity, a place where goblins are respected and the streets are paved with gold." The Knock Goblins smiled back at her weakly, but none made any attempt to reply. They didn't have the energy. Even the young'uns, who had started out so enthusiastically, gamboling ahead like lambs, were now dragging their feet painfully slowly. Mim knew it would not be long before the first of her party gave up completely. "Hey!" she cried out to the gaunt figure ahead. "Slow down a bit!" Screed turned. "Now what?" he snapped irritably. Mim strode towards him. The burning sun beat down ferociously. Screed waited for her to catch up, hands on hips, leering. "We need a rest," she panted. Screed looked her up and down, then squinted up at the sky. "We keep on till sundown," he said. "Then we'll rest for the night. It's too dangerous traveling by darkness. What with the sinking mud and poisonous blowholes." "Not to mention the muglumps, oozefish, and white ravens," Mim interrupted tartly. "Not that we've encountered any so far." Screed pulled himself up to his full height and stared down his nose at her scornfully. "Forgive me," he said, his voice loaded with sarcasm. "I was under the impression that you employed me as a guide to avoid these dangers. If I'd only known you'd wanted to see them for yourselves." Mim looked down sheepishly. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just, well, some of us are finding it difficult to keep up with the pace you're setting." Screed glanced back along the line of goblins. "You paid for a 2-day crossing," he said sharply. "Any longer than that and it'll cost ya." "But we haven't got any more money," Mim cried out. Screed's yellow teeth gleamed against the bleached paleness of his lips. "Like I say," he said, turning and walking away, "it'll cost you." Darkness had fallen by the time Screed Toe-Taker called it a day. He stopped on an outcrops of rocks and placed the lantern down. "We'll stop here," he called back through cupped hands. One by one, the goblins started to arrive. "Keep that infant still," Screed shouted at a young female with a squalling babe in arms. "It'll attract every muglumper miles around." He lifted the lantern and peered back the way they came. "And where are the others?" he snapped. "Just my luck if they've already gone and gotten themselves lost."
"Now look, over there!"
one of the young'uns cried and pointed back towards a curious squat figure which was shuffling towards them out of the low swirling mist. As it grew closer, the one figure became three. It was Mim, trudging purposely on with a youngster on her back and an arm around old Torp. Screed smiled. "All present and correct," he said. Buoyed up by the gleeful cheers of the others, Mim staggered across that last stretch of sucking quicksilver mud and up onto the rocky outcrop. Old Torp released himself from her supporting arm and sat down.
"Well done, old-timer," she whispered breathlessly. "You made it."
She pulled down the sleeping youngster from her back, laid him gently down on the ground, and covered him with a blanket. Then, groaning with the effort, she pulled herself upright and looked around.
"Well, it's certainly not the most comfortable place I've ever spent the night," she said. "But it's dry, and that's the main thing. So, thank you, Screed, for bringing us to this place."
"My pleasure," he said, ignoring the sullen faces of the others. It was, after all, an expression he'd seen 1,000 times before. "And now," he said, "you must all get some sleep." The knot goblins didn't need telling twice. Within seconds, all of them were rolled up in their blankets like a row of woolly cocoons. All, that is, except for Mim.
"And yourself?"
she asked Screed. "Me?" he said loftily as he perched himself on the top of the tallest rock. "Oh, don't you worry about me. I have little need of sleep." He gazed round the flat landscape, glinting and glistening like burnished silver beneath the moon. "Besides, someone has to keep watch." Mim was reassured. Despite what she said earlier, she hadn't liked the sound of muglumps, oozefish, or white ravens one tiny little bit. She wished Screed a good night, snuggled up between two of the young'uns, and by the time dark clouds rolled over the moon a couple minutes later, she was, like all the others, fast asleep. Screed listened to the rasping chorus of snoring and smirked to himself. "Sleep well, little dwarves," he whispered. "Or goblins, or whatever you are." He brought the lantern nearer as the clouds rolled in, and pulled a knife from his belt, which he began sliding gently back and forwards over the smooth rock. Occasionally he would spit on the metal and inspect the blade in the yellow light. Then off he went again, slowly, methodically, whoosh, 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 until every point along the blade was sharp enough to split a hair in two. Woe betide the creature that thought it could get the better of him. Screed stood up, lantern in one hand, knife in the other. Woe betide any who fell into his clutches. Abruptly, the clouds rolled back, and the bright moon shone down on the grisly scene, turning everything to black and white. White blankets, black blood, white bony body lurching on into the mud, black shadows stretching back across the rocks. White ravens already scavenging, black deeds, monstrous deeds. With his leather bag full of bloody booty clasped in his bony hand, Screed Toe-Taker picked his way across the mire. Far away in front of him, the moon glinted on the wreck of a skyship which lay half buried in the mud like a giant skeleton. Unblinking, Screed kept his eyes fixed on the glinting ribs of the broken hull. Closer and closer he came. Not once did he falter. Not once did he look back. "At last," Screed muttered as he made it to the wreck. He glanced around for any telltale signs of intrusion, and, when he was satisfied that there was no one and nothing there, he scuttled into the shadowy recesses of the lopsided shipwreck. If some intruder had taken the opportunity to investigate the place during its owner's absence, he, she, or it would have been left shaking with disbelief at the horrors the ship concealed. The dank air, for a start, was thick with the pungent stench of death. And then there were the walls, studded their length and breadth with mummified toes nailed to the wood. There were big toes, small toes, hairy toes, scaly toes, toes with razor-sharp talons, toes with claws, toes with webbing, all of them shriveled and black. And these were just a fraction of the total number, the select few. For at the far end of the hall, in a massive wedge-shaped drift, were thousands upon thousands more. Screed sloshed his way along the skyship. He didn't register the gory trophies lining the walls. Neither did he notice the awful stench. To Screed Toe-Taker, the wreck of the wind cutter simply smelled of home. He hung the lantern on a hook above a huge chest of ironwood and glass, opened the lid, crouched down, and set to work. One by one, he pulled the severed toes from his bag, and like an insane manicurist, scraped beneath the nails with a small file. Tiny particles of dust, some glistening white, some tinged with sepia, dropped down into the chest with the rest, and when he was satisfied that every speck had been removed, he tossed the toes on to the great heap with the others. Finally done, Screed stared down with dreamy contentment into the chest. It was more than 3/4 full of the toenail scrapings.
"Oh, my beautiful Looty Booty," he whispered. "One day you will fill the chest, right up to the top. One day soon, sky willing. And on that wondrous day, then maybe, just maybe, shall my quest be at an end."
Screed stood up, slammed the lid shut, and stepped outside. The long night was over. To his left, the telltale purple clouds of a gathering storm were rolling in from the retreating darkness. To his right and far away in the distance was a skyship, silhouetted against the rising sun. Both were coming closer.